Thank you. I'd like to call a regular meeting of the Narragansett Planning Board to order. Mr. Friday? Mr. Brady?
Here.
Dr. O'Neill?
Here.
Mr. Fleming, I'm here, and I'm sorry, it's Tuesday, June 20th, 2023, for the record. First item is 4 sets of minutes on the consent agenda, but I see Mr. Brady was absent for one of them, so we're going to have to take them as separate votes.
Sorry about that.
We can't take it as a consent agenda. We have to take them separately. So, does anyone have any additions or edits to any of the minutes? And then I'll take a motion one by one.
Even though I was recused for part of it, I can still vote on it, right? Yes.
Yeah,
Just hear the rest of it.
sure.
Chair, a request. In the future, where we have, where we find in conformance with the town's comprehensive plan, can we elaborate for the residential development? Because there's been some other aspects of some of the projects that I don't think we're in conformance with.
That would have to, I'm sorry.
Yep.
That would have to come from Mike because that's what I was told to write.
Yeah, I mean, the level of detail can always be made
Right.
crazy. I don't know what
No, what,
the minimum level of detail that needs to be.
it's really up to the board as to what you want to do with that. Remember, the minutes are not the official document. The official document
Right.
is whatever gets signed, an approval letter or a certificate of completeness for the correspondence to the zoning board. But we could expand a little bit. I don't see any problem with adding a little bit more detail in the minutes.
Just that one phrase, because I feel like there's times when there's other provisions
Joe?
of the projects we're approving that aren't conformance with the comprehensive plan.
Right, well, my buddy Steve here, I think has pointed out to me, it's okay to say the words I don't want to say. I mean, the application is complete. I think we can all agree and move on. This idea that it either is or isn't in conformance is sometimes debatable. So I think that's really what you're bringing up, isn't it?
True, Doctor. But under the state law, your primary responsibility is to make some commentary about compliance with the comp plan. You can say fully compliant, you can say compliant with the land use element, which we have done in the past. You can say compliant with housing section or the economic development section, whatever may be relevant. But you do have to make comment on it. The completeness part is set forth in the local zoning regulations. So that's why we put the two components together in the
All right,
completeness and
I
conformance.
don't have a problem if we want to clarify that point, but Mike's point is the right one, is this is not the definitive word on this. We don't go down the rabbit hole with the detail. That's in the staff summary. That's in the letter from me to whoever, to the zoning board or the council president. So that information is documented. I don't mind doing that, but
Right.
I don't want to, for staff, and for the board, I don't want the minutes to be, a transcript.
Right, they don't need to be a transcript, that's
No.
true.
All right.
Heidi had her hand
I
up.
just wanted, just for your edification, it does, the actual certificate of completeness does state in conformance with the land use element of the comprehensive plan. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay, so any edits or comments on those 4 sets of minutes?
Yeah, so we have to do them individually, right?
Yes,
So
we
we're doing
do.
April 18th first, right?
Go ahead, Joe.
So, hey, Miss Heidi, page 4 of 5, my brother Robert wasn't here, so he's got his name there, though, R. O'Neill. Not that that makes a lot of difference, but somebody wants to
Where are you,
challenge
page
the
4?
accuracy. Page 4, R. O'Neill,
Yeah, I just
And-
add the D.
and page 5.
I believe that was Freudian.
Freudian?
What am I missing?
So two motions in a row on page 4, and then somewhere, and then a motion on page 5, instead of saying J. O'Neill said R.
R.
O'Neill.
O'Neill, yeah.
Yeah, wishful thinking, Joe. I mean,
Well, no, but I did make it later on in that, but I said.
I'd prefer to have you than Bob here anyhow, but that's
Be
just me.
careful what you just said.
All right, so we'll make that correction.
Okay. Ooh. All right,
can
with
we
that
have a-
correction, so move
Can we have a
on that set of
motion on
minutes,
that?
yeah.
So moved by Dr. O'Neill. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Friday. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And then the next one, Joe?
16th, April.
April 26th? No.
26th, April 26th, a Wednesday. That threw me off there. Yeah, I didn't see anything on those, you guys? No.
Go ahead, make the
Move those-
motion.
Motion to approve those
Motion.
minutes.
Motion by Dr. O'Neill, second by Mr. Brady. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and that one's
May.
accepted, 4-0.
May 24th,
Mr. Brady needs to recuse. Go ahead.
the old recuser.
Do you have anything?
I don't see anything on that either. Move to approve.
Second?
Minutes,
Motion
May
by O'Neill
24.
and seconded by Mr. Friday. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0 and 1.
Abstain, yep. And then
And then-
on June 1st, Thursday, the minutes, I didn't see anything to correct. Anything?
All set?
All set?
Mo-
Move to approve
Motion by
those.
Dr. O'Neill,
June 1st.
second by Mr. Brady. All those in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Thank you very much. For the public, just so you know, the pre-application review comprehensive permit of Farrelly has been removed from tonight's agenda. At the applicant's request, they're continuing that to another date, so. Okay, so the regular agenda, recommendation to town council is continue the zoning text amendment, section 2.2, add definition of college student, and section 7, add new subsection regulating student occupied dwellings. So this is a continuation of June 1st meeting. We had continued it and left the hearing open. Oh, my intention is to get a recommendation tonight. The council needs our recommendation by the end of the month. We still have, the 28th of June, we could do it, but I'd really prefer having it wrapped up tonight if we could, if everybody's comfortable with their positions. So we took some public commentary last time. We received a number of pieces of correspondence via email. Since that last meeting, the board has all those. They've read all those. They're part of the record. So I think what I'd like to do with council's approval is take public commentary from anyone who did not speak at June 1st, because their thoughts are already on the record. And then, once that's done, we can go and the board can discuss and make a decision, if that makes sense. Is that fine, Steve? So anyone who didn't speak on June 1, who wants to speak? Okay. Record showed no one, they either spoke or they don't want to speak tonight. Okay. So I guess the way that we've done this in the past is we've all kind of said what we think, and then when that's all done, someone makes a motion, and remember what's in front of us, a recommendation to the council, their referral to us on the definition of college student and the 3-student subsection. It's not a public hearing. Yeah, but we're not taking sworn testimony, it's a recommendation. So what's your question, Mr. Lynch? I don't understand.
Mr. Lynch, the planning board's responsibility here is to make a recommendation to the town council. In the town charter, nowhere in the town charter or in the zoning ordinance does it state that the planning board holds a formal public hearing. You can see we have no stenographer here tonight. She was here, she may have been here the other night if we had other information, other projects on the agenda. But there is no reason, there's no necessity or legal requirement to hold a formal public hearing. So this is a discussion, review, conclusions, and recommendation.
And you did have an opportunity to speak last time. if someone showed up, what do you think? I think we've been as agreeable as any board to allow people to speak. We want to get their comments on record. We got them in written form and oral form, and now it's time to make a decision. Yeah, Mike?
Have we established that nobody here has a comment?
Yeah, I already did that. I already did it.
I'm just want to
Yep, no, I already did that. Go ahead, Mike.
I sent out an amended staff report today.
Yeah.
You all got it?
Yeah.
Okay. All I did was add in a couple of comments to address sections 21 of the zoning ordinance.
right.
Nothing of substance was changed, and I did not make any change to my recommendation, for the record.
So, as I was saying,
Yeah.
we're going to make some commentary. I'll go down the board. I'll start. It's Groundhog Day, right? How many times we've been here? So there's a few things, and again, these are my personal comments about this. There are a few things that I believe to be true, that I've always believed to be true, that make this a kind of a, not difficult, but kind of a complex decision as to what makes sense for the town. One, I think that most people agree, that I've always felt, is we need to try to provide more opportunity for families to live here, for year-round residents to live here. I think it's a really serious problem that we don't have the opportunities, and I understand there's a million different reasons for that, not the least of which is the housing market, which I don't think any of us can control, but I think one of the goals, and it's a goal in the comp plan, we have to try to provide more opportunities for family and year-round residents, young families. A second thing that I think is true, that I think a lot of people don't believe is true, but I do, is that the student population and the tourist population and the summer rentals and other rentals, in my view, are an integral part of this community. Historically, they have been. I would like them to continue to be. I think there's a number of people in this town who don't feel that way, but I do. So I'm supportive of the students. I'm supportive of the tourist community. At the same time, trying to balance opportunities for year-round housing and families to move here, and that's why it becomes a complex thing for me. And the other thing that a lot of people might not agree with, but I do, I feel, is that the student population and the summer rentals and even other rentals, not to mention year-round, but certainly those seasonal populations do cause significant disturbances to the residential neighborhoods, and something needs to be done. It's not the majority by any means, but those constituent groups do cause disturbances to our residential neighborhoods. All that leads to why I've supported back in 2016 the 4 unrelated. Because as I said last time, there needs to be a bar set. I think most people comply with laws. We know if somebody's building an addition, they come in, they ask Jill, they ask Wayne, what's the side yard setback, what's the height? They're told, they comply. Same with an ordinance such as how many can occupy a house. Most people will try to find out what it is and then they'll comply. Obviously, there are those who are always looking to game the system. So I supported the 4 unrelated because I think it's important to set a number. I'm not really sure I know what the number is. I think it's either 3 or 4, but I don't know what it is. I'm not that smart. But it's some number, and I don't think, as I said last time, it has anything to do with controlling big parties. I think big parties are going to happen, particularly with social media. People can, one person living in a house can have 200 people at a party in a matter of hours or days. So I don't think the number of people in a house has anything to do with controlling the big parties. That has to be the purview of the police department to enforce that, and public nuisance and public health and safety. But I think the limit on the number of people in the house does have an impact. It's not the be-all and end-all by any means, but it does have an impact on the day-to-day disturbances. The number of people in the house, the number of cars, the number of overnight guests, the trash, the noise, the music, the partying, it does, I think, have a mitigating effect with other things. And so that's why I supported the 4 unrelated. And I think it's interesting, last time that this board made a recommendation against the 3 student, we made 3 other recommendations, all of which were implemented and are either, done or in progress, and I think are hopefully having a positive effect. So there's a number of things that always need to be done to control the disturbances in neighborhoods and to make sure that people's quality of life isn't disturbed. This is one, the number of people in the house. So that's why I supported the 4 unrelated. I've been opposed to the student before, and I'm opposed to it again for 2 reasons. One is, I do think, even though some people have submitted stuff saying they don't think it's redundant and the unrelated is unenforceable, I think the student ordinance is redundant to the unrelated, because in 99+% of the cases where students live in a house, they're not related. So no one's been able to convince me why the unrelated can't be used to enforce any disturbance that involves students, because in virtually every case, they're unrelated. Now, I understand the enforcement's difficult. We're finding that out more and more. But frankly, folks, I don't think enforcing the student ordinance is that easy either. I don't think that's a walk in the park. I mean, people say to me, well, you can't enforce the unrelated, but the student, we just got to get the roster from you or I and we're all set. I don't think that's that easy, but I'll leave that to others. There are people I talk to inside this building who have said, we can enforce the unrelated. We just need to work on it. We need to do certain things. So again, I think my first objection to the 3 student is that it's redundant to the unrelated. My bigger objection is that it creates a different standard for students than for the other renters, the unrelated, the seasonal renters. And if we get a short-term ordinance, I'm going to be looking at that too, because I suppose we're going to be making a recommendation on the short-term ordinance. I'm going to be looking at consistency on that as well. But this student ordinance creates a different standard for students than it does for unrelated. It's 3 versus 4. It's different zones. So there's a discrepancy, and I understand that the Supreme Court of Rhode Island has said that the students are not a protected class. I get that I guess, I'm not a lawyer. I get it from a legal perspective. They haven't lost their constitutional rights, but as the old judge said, I know it when I see it. And you're creating a different standard for the students than you are for someone else. To me, that's bias and prejudice. It may not rise to the level of they've lost their constitutional rights in terms of the eyes of the Supreme Court, but to me, it's bias and it's prejudice, and it's creating a different thing, a different standard. The students are mentioned directly in the comp plan on a couple of occasions, but more often than not, and I'll tick off the elements and stuff just for the record. I can do that, or I can submit it, but more often than not, they're treated as seasonal renters. You see it, and it says in there. Hang on a second. Guiding principle number 2, enhancing year-round community. Talking about tourist and short-term college student rentals, seasonal rentals, and, quote, each of these groups bring with it certain qualities that contribute to the town's character. Positive and negative, the land use, sustainable planning, the economic development ordinance, Of course, all the housing ordinances talk about how both groups bring positive and negative to the community. And I support that. I think they do. They both bring. That's why I think we need to put a limit. My problem is creating that disparity, creating the 3 and the 4. And one part of the reason I brought up last meeting the history of how we got to the 4 was because I wanted people to understand. I think this town, if they had their druthers, probably would have set the unrelated at 3. And I'd have much less of a problem here. Because I just think it's inherently unfair to treat the students in a different manner than the unrelated. I think they need to be regulated with some limit. I think it needs to be the same limit, and it needs to be the same zones. I don't understand why there's a discrepancy between the two. Now, if you tell me that we can't enforce the unrelated, and if the council were to say, let's have a student/unrelated ordinance with the same number in the same zones, as a practical matter, I'd probably say, okay, we could probably work with that because you're still going after the same groups with that ordinance, but you're doing it fairly. You're doing it with the same number and the same zones. So our job here is not to change the ordinance. Our job is to go up or down on what's in front of us. And what's in front of me is a 3-student ordinance, which I don't think is fair relative to where the unrelated is. Now, last point that I would like to make is because the enforcement's so difficult, and I think unrelated is difficult to enforce and student is difficult to enforce, we have to go up or down on this 3-student ordinance for sure. But the planning board also has a responsibility to make recommendations or findings of fact or comments to the council for them to consider. And just very quickly, 32, 34 cities and towns have an unrelated ordinance. I talked to the building inspector on maybe 10 of them, 9 of them maybe, and admittedly, most of them don't see a problem and therefore haven't had to face it. South Kingstown has an interesting approach where it's 3 unrelated, but if you want more, you have to get a special use permit. So you have to go before the planning board and the zoning board and present your case as to why that particular location will not severely or negatively impact the surrounding area and obtain a special use permit. We do it with other things. It seems to me to be an interesting way to address the issue. And one that isn't fraught with, well, let's take a DNA test, or can we get the URI listing because it's protected information. It's going to be difficult to enforce those two. Smithfield has a 3 unrelated, but they base it on square footage, either of the home or the lot, and occupancy, which kind of points to what we thought was going to come down with the legislature was number per bedroom, but in the 11th hour that didn't pass, right? The unrelated. But Smithfield does it a little bit different way when they have to enforce it based, and I don't know the details of it, but I'm just throwing that out as two towns that have a slightly different approach, even though they have an unrelated on the books. So they've taken it a step further, at least try to work out some system to do that. And then the last point I'll make is, and this will explode the top of the head of a lot of people in this town, I know that, because it speaks to tax policy and those things. But the town could consider licensure for the rentals, as other entities are licensed. You have to do certain things to obtain a license. And you put performance standards with that license, and if those performance standards are not met, much like a liquor store or a bar that doesn't meet its obligation, it gets called before the council for a show cause hearing and may lose its license. Now, I realize the people who want to create different tax a different tax system based on rental properties, and other will lose their mind over this, I understand. But the concept of establishing a license, which I don't think is done in Rhode Island so much, but I have heard that it's done in other states. And you could put performance standards on the license that don't tie to unrelated status or student status, but tie to, bad behavior. I mean, you could put a performance standard that says you get an orange sticker, and then the police are called out twice with legitimate complaints. After that, you're called before the council for a show cause hearing. I mean, you could do things like that I think would be better to manage the disturbance in the neighborhoods. Because I still think the unrelated and the student both are difficult to enforce. So I'm going to vote against the 3 student on the basis primarily, first of all, that it's redundant, but secondly, that it does create a disparity between itself, the student population, and the other rental populations. And I don't think, from a fairness perspective, that that's right. And in fact, I don't think it's consistent with the comp plan, who treat those 2 populations multiple times in the comp plan as the same. In fact, I'll leave you with one last thing. The land use element under sustainable planning, talking about planning, balancing impacts so not one natural resource or one neighborhood or one group of people bears the burden of a decision. So people will say, well, the year-round residents shouldn't bear the burden. I agree. But neither should the students relative to the other rentals. Like, we got to make this, in my view, we got to make it fair. So that's my pitch. Joe?
Jesus, that's Patrick Henry here. It's tough to come up to the microphone after that. No, but as anybody here who has any history knows, I was here back 6 years ago, and we discussed this, and we had all kinds of neighborhood groups in and got their opinions and their suggestions and recommendations, and that's how we came up with the 4 unrelated, and we did not support the word students because of the bias of the word. And granted that they may be the majority of people who create the problem, but that's not totally true anymore because, as we know from the use of the internet, within a matter of hours, certainly within a day, you can get 100 people out on the lawn. 50% of them, I'll bet, are not University of Rhode Island students. So, that term is just, I happen to be from New Jersey, so you get the Jersey crowd up in the summer, and they want to have a good time out on the lawn and, again, invite whoever. So the idea, again, of targeting students, maybe I'm partially biased because of my long history as a student, but we discussed this, and I thought we had come to some, well, it was 5-0 as far as the board goes, in favor of not using a word like students. It's the people who cause the problem who are the problem. The other thing is the whole business of enforcement is, to me, we wouldn't be talking today if we enforced this, right? We wouldn't be here talking about this if it was enforced. It's not enforced. My discussions with people in the town, it's not just the call the police, they're having 100 people on the lawn. It's the guys, or the gals, women, walking around throwing the beer cans, urinating on the people's property and threatening them if they call the police. Those are the kind of issues in the background that are difficult to control. As far as enforcement goes, there was a great discussion, again, that's a long time ago, about creating a financial source to have a full-time person take over this job. But the difficulty there right away, as you probably know, is when you knock on the door and a person steps up, whether you use the word student or unrelated, they deny it, right? I'm not a student. No, everybody in here is related to me, and not let the person in, of course. So I think, however this can be enforced, and certainly any, maybe we have a very limited audience here, but people in neighborhoods, they know who's got, 8 people renting the basement, renting the garage is already divided into 2 bedrooms. I brought this up 6 years ago, and I'll bring it up again. If somebody wants to do this, right, with their 3 or 4 bedroom house, they divide the garage, they got 2 bedrooms. They divide the basement, they got 2 more bedrooms. And they divide the attic, they got 2 more bedrooms. If they want to do this, right? With 1 entrance and exit to each of those 3 things I just mentioned. That's a disaster waiting to happen, isn't it? So I think there's another obligation to somehow control this, not just the noise element or the disruption element. There's also a safety issue here. So as I said a few sentences back, if we had some mechanism of enforcement and if people had I think we have 2,100 registered homes. I think that's the number you gave us, some number like that. And we charged a little more, we could generate the finances to have somebody oversee this and drive around. This isn't rocket science, right? You drive around on Monday and Tuesday, and you got 8 cars in the driveway. This can be done. But the idea of somehow, because the citizens of the town are still not happy with what's going on in the neighborhoods, that using this 3-student ordinance is going to change anything. I'm not going to be here, but 6 years from now, we're all going to be back in this room, right? Just like we are with the signage at the beach, right? So it has to be action, and this has to be enforced in some fair way. But I think what we're being asked to support here, the 3-student ordinance, to me, it's not effective. It's words. It's something on the books that maybe looks good. But unless you have enforcement of it, it doesn't make any difference whether the number is 3 or 4. So that's my strong feeling about it.
Thank you, Dr. O'Neill. Mr. Brady.
Thank you. Being a longtime URI student and therefore a tenant of Narragansett for 2 undergraduates and a master's degree, I've had the privilege of living in the community both as a full-time resident and as a student resident. Students and summer rentals are an integral part of the community. They add a unique vibrancy to Narragansett. It always has been that way. My senior year, we had a house on Great Island. We thought we were the coolest kids in the world. Our address was Goose Island Road, Great Island, Rhode Island. It doesn't get any cooler than that. I'm sorry. And we had a party our first weekend. We each invited a few people, said we're just going to keep it small. Half of campus showed up. The next day, the fishermen on either side of us came over and knocked on the door and said, "Gentlemen, love having you in the neighborhood. Next time one of your friends throws a beer bottle against the house and wakes up my kids, I'm going to shoot them." And we were like, "Look, we're sorry. What do we need to do?" And we became a part of the neighborhood. We helped people winterize their homes. We mowed lawn. We apologized. We got to be neighbors, and we stayed that way. We grew up. We learned. Do all students do that? No. Not going to tell you that, all right? Because they are also a contributing factor to neighborhood disturbances, both short-term, long-term, small and large. And the impact is only going to increase as housing costs create a larger and larger investment population within Narragansett. The problem with this ordinance is that it does not address what I've heard from people who've stopped me in Stop and Shop, sent texts and emails, et cetera. It's not going to address large gatherings, parties, loud groups, trash, traffic, parties. It's not going to promote year-round family housing or affordable housing for that matter, all right? And those that follow the rules are going to follow these rules. And those that don't, they're not. I think the ordinance itself lacks a comprehensive approach. I think it is void of a number of key things. It doesn't coordinate with the 4 unrelated, and it should be an integral part. There should have been a multi-pronged from the beginning. It should be part of short-term rentals. From everything that I've heard, both in the hearings here and letters that have been sent to us, emails, and people that have stopped me, the summer problem is bigger than the student problem. The Airbnbs, the weekenders that come in, don't care, don't stay long enough to get caught for anything, are in and out, seem to have a larger impact and a growing impact on the community than even the students do. And that's identified by the residents, all right? I really have a question about the enforcement. I mean, one of the things we heard is that tenant doesn't have to identify themselves as a student. There's no way to do that. We have, as far as I can see, and I brought this up before, no real tangible codification within this, all right? There's no registration and codification of penalties to the landlord with performance standards. Tenants are the responsibility of the landlords, but they are also hold their own responsibilities. Landlord could be forced could be required when they register as a landlord, they can register the tenants with contact information. Is this going to solve anything? No, but if you know that your name and phone number has just been placed with the town, it does add some weight. And there need to be performance standards and some codified penalties with that. None of this exists, whether it's short-term or student rentals. And the fact of the matter is, those are hand in hand. This isn't a student problem anymore. And in the feedback that I've heard over and over again from people, students, while their hair longer, tend to have a smaller negative impact than the short-termers. And that's really becoming a growing issue. I just find this to be flawed. I understand the reason behind it. And I understand the council wants this, and that's part of our job is to send them what they want, and they need to deal with it. But I really want to go on record as saying I think this is flawed. I think it lacks comprehensive approach. I think it lacks visions. I don't think there is any tactical implementation on this. It is just something to put on the books, check it off, we did it. I don't know what you've really done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Mr. Friday.
Thank you, Chairman. A question process-wise. I have two documents, and I don't know if I can hand them to the other board members. One is URI enrollment data, and the other is I did a study of MLS on house sales and compared them to rental data and.
Sure, I mean, you can, obviously, if you want to speak about.
Yeah, if you want to discuss it. No, we haven't seen anything.
Does that have to be given to the public for them to also?
Well, it's part of the record.
Yeah, you know what, Rupert?
Okay.
If you could speak.
Okay, okay.
Documents,
Yep.
you can take an hour and go over the document.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, an hour? Well, no.
Rupert, no, you cannot.
So,
Yeah, in all seriousness, just say words
I got it.
in advance, but take your time. And go
So I'm not as articulate as my companions on the board here from extemporaneously, so I sort of jotted out my notes, and I'm going to work from them. But I'm going to start with 3 disclosures. First, I moved to Rhode Island to work for University of Rhode Island at a job at the Bay campus, which is why I live in Narragansett. Second, my wife has written 2 letters to the editor about this issue. I didn't have anything to do with these letters. She's long been an activist and was an editor of her school newspaper. Third, I have 2 brothers who are landlords, have numerous rental properties in Pittsburgh, which they rent to students from Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, and Point Park College. One of them owned 3 houses in Narragansett, which they rented to students. He has not had houses in Narragansett for over 15 years, so it's not a conflict of interest, but his experience informs my perspective. So my comments, I've been living with this since moving to Rhode Island. As I said, I came here for a job with URI, and when we moved here, it was nearly impossible to find a place we could rent on a year-round basis for our family. And then when we were trying to buy a house, the realtors steered us away from the communities that had a lot of student rentals. They said, no, you don't want to live here because this is a neighborhood with lots of student rentals. When we bought the house where we live, there were no student rentals on our street. There's 13 houses there now, and during the time that we've lived there, 3 of the 13 houses have been purchased by people that rented them to students, 1, 3 students, 1, 4 students, and 1, at least 5, and often more than 5 students. So I have direct experience with these issues. And I believe that the issue is not a student issue. It's a zoning issue, it's a real estate investment issue, it's a landlord issue, as a couple others have said, and frankly, it's a URI issue because the university is not working to provide adequate housing for the students they've enrolled. Since we've moved here, the enrollment at University of Rhode Island has increased. Undergraduate student enrollment has increased from 11,600 to 14,921 this year. So it's an increase of 3,321, 28%, almost 30% in the years we've lived here. And they've added a few additional dorms, a little more housing on campus, but they really are expecting the community to absorb the housing. And I think we saw this during COVID. When COVID happened, they reduced the density of people living in their dorms, and they pushed all those folks into our community. So the university isn't really being an even partner with us. There's a lot of discussion about the comprehensive plan saying we need to partner with the university. I think it needs to be a two-way street, and I don't think it has been a two-way street. The issue is unique to Narragansett. If you go to other college towns, student rentals are off campus in nearly every other community are year-round rentals. Penn State, the attorney that was here at the last meeting saying, this isn't a problem at Penn State. If you're a student at Penn State and you're renting a property off campus, it's a year-round rental. You can't rent it for the college year. It's the same at University of Pittsburgh. It's the same in Charlottesville, University of Virginia. Universally, nearly universally, off-campus rentals for students in other places are year-round rentals. They're not 9-month rentals. So this is pretty much a unique issue. The pattern of rentals in Narragansett, and I think this was mentioned by you, Chairman, the pattern of rentals in Narragansett developed organically by people who had homes in what I call summer colony communities that they then rented to the students off-season. It started that way, but the economics are so lucrative that this trend has shifted from that origin to people buying houses with the expectation they will rent them. And the trends are clear. The invention of Airbnb a couple years ago really accelerated investment purchases, and it was like throwing gasoline on the fire. So like the trend from Airbnb and like the trend increased attendance at the university, increased enrollment, it's really spreading seasonal rentals into every neighborhood. And I think it's pretty clear that seasonal rentals impact the quality of life for year-round residents living here. I think everybody here acknowledges that. I know 3 families, they're longtime residents of Narragansett who raised their families here, who've moved to neighboring towns. And they've moved to neighboring towns because of the loss of community and because of the loss of quality of life. And I think that trend is, it's impacting our population. I mean, it's crazy. Narragansett, with the beaches, with the shoreline, we got to be one of the only shoreline communities in the country that's actually losing population. I mean, that's crazy. The seasonal rentals are impacting housing prices here. Real estate investors are driving up prices for single-family homes beyond what a family would reasonably pay for a house. And I think we're at a tipping point for the future of Narragansett. I hope we're not past the tipping point, that we can retain year-round residents in real communities. From my perspective, this ordinance addresses two aspects of the issue. It regulates the density of students in houses in higher density single-family neighborhoods, R20, R10, R10A. These are the neighborhoods with half-acre and quarter-acre lots. At the lower density, students will integrate more seamlessly into the community. They're much less likely to disrupt the quality of life for year-round residents. We've learned from affordable housing that it's best not to concentrate it and integrate it into the community. I believe the same is true for student housing, if there aren't student-specific dorms or apartment buildings. And I believe managing the density of students will reduce the tension between students and year-round residents. The second aspect that I think this ordinance addresses, although not perfectly, it reduces the revenue that single-family houses will generate as seasonal student rentals, especially for 4+ bedrooms. This will reduce the financial incentive for real estate investors to drive up housing prices in Narragansett by purchasing houses to create rental businesses. And hopefully, this will keep some of our single-family houses more affordable. And hopefully, it will also reduce the incentive for landlords to rent seasonally, and some of them may choose to rent on an annual basis, and thus increase the supply of annual rentals. So I'm supportive of this. I think there's lots of documentation of how it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. I think it's consistent with the zoning in a lot of ways. The floor area ratio ordinance, it pretty much targets the same parts of the town. It's R20s or R10s and R10A. And there's other places in the zoning ordinance where we specifically address density, and I think this is consistent with those. Notably, the zoning ordinance doesn't allow sorority or fraternity houses. It doesn't allow dormitories. So this isn't anti-URI. I mean, we've long had those provisions on our zoning ordinance, and nobody says, oh, that's anti-URI. I did a study of MLS data of house sales in the last 5 years, and after searching for the sales, I compared it to where the owner lives and the number of bedrooms. The houses sold sold in the last 5 years in Narragansett, 32.9% are owner occupied. That compares to over 60% historically. So 67% are not owner occupied. 37% are out of state ownership. I don't know how that compares because I don't know the history ownership. Of the houses sold in Narragansett in the last 5 years, 36.6% are registered on either the Narragansett rental database or the state short-term rental database. And again, that's significantly higher than the trend traditionally, which is about 25%. And there's considerable evidence that many of the rental properties are not registered in Narragansett. 13% of the properties on the state short-term rental database are not on the town's rental database. So I think there's no ordinance that's perfect, and I think this ordinance is a step in the right direction, and I don't think it's good to let perfect stand in the way of making progress and in moving toward strategies that I hope will make Narragansett a more sustainable, more balance between the investment, seasonal rentals, and the year-long residents. And that's my perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Friday. Appreciate that. Appreciate everybody's comments. Joe? Go ahead.
Yeah, you touched on something which I didn't emphasize. I think the landlords, you mentioned your family or landlords, and probably stay on top of their properties and do the right thing. But we've brought this up in the past, and I'm sure we did when we talked about this back in 2016 there. There has to be a penalty for the landlord to drive up the driveway and say, I know you lied to the guy who knocked on the door. You are not all cousins, or you are students. You tell them you're not students. I know who you are. You're creating a problem here, and I just got fined $5,000. Do you know what that means? That means you go, because I can't afford to get fined $5,000. So the next time I get a problem like this, they won't allow me to rent the house for a year. You have to have a penalty that grabs people, and say you can't, because they really have the responsibility over the students. And the police show up and the kids all run inside the house, right? I mean, there has to be a way to make it work so that the troublemakers, those people, don't exist. There has to be a way to do it, and in my opinion, the landlord has the grip. But you can't, orange sticker's a great idea, but people don't like to pay big money because they're in the business to make money. So I think that somehow has to be woven in whatever the town's policies are as far as rentals go. It's not before us here in terms of this particular three-student policy they're talking about, but if it's nice, I said this earlier, it's nice you pass a law and you go back to work, right? That doesn't solve the problem. You have to have a way to solve the problem. And as far as I'm concerned, hit them in the wallet, you'll solve the problem.
Sort of following up that, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I think landlord accountability is really key. Like the 3 houses across the street from me, the problem house, the landlord lives in Florida. He hasn't spent a day in the house. Don't know how to contact him if we have a problem. And as far as I can see, there's no consequence to the landlord. There's no accountability. And when I talk to my brothers that are the landlords about the issues in Narragansett, they say the issue's the landlords. That's their perspective.
Just as a point, and again, we're not going down this rabbit hole because we don't know, but just as we discuss issues, if there was licensure involved and there were performance standards, they would fall to the landlord, I think. And the landlord would have to make sure, particularly if they got called in a show cause hearing, they'd have to redress those in front of the council, or they'd lose their license. So, I mean, that's one way, I think, not a lawyer, but that's one way to address it. Yeah, before you go, Mr. Brady, go ahead, and I'll say something.
Yeah, we had said from the beginning we would try to, excuse me. I've never been accused of having to have a microphone, so it's new. We had said that we wanted to give everyone an opportunity to speak, and I know a young lady in the back came in after the public comment. I don't know if she has anything to add to this conversation before we get to a point where we're voting on something?
No, she doesn't want to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and I just think it's one thing that's interesting is a kind of aside, and I actually didn't want this meeting to pass without Joe O'Neill hearing for the 500th time from me that the comp plan is like the Bible. We've been saying that since its initiation. Anything you want to find Any position you take, there's something in the comp plan that's either going to support it or refute it. I mean, it's just by its nature, it is written that way. And I think it's interesting, Mr. DeLuca did his professional job as excellently as he always does by identifying the elements in the comp plan that the board should consider as it relates to this ordinance. I think Mr. Lynch submitted something, I'm not sure what the genesis of that was, from another consultant who cited many of the same elements. And I've got, just for the record, guiding principle number 2, under land use sustainable planning, under economic development, 2.1.d, and under housing, H.1, 1.3, H1.4, H1.5, also mentioned in Mr. DeLuca's and the other consultants, but it's just an interpretation of how you read that particular element or that view. I mean, I'm not, there's no conclusion here. I'm just saying that when we cite the comp plan, it's much about your interpretation. And sorry, Joe, but I'm going to invoke the Bible again. It's just, you know, you got an eye for an eye and you got to turn the other cheek. They're both in the same book, right? So, I mean, you know that you can do that, and you can do it with the comp plan. So I appreciate everybody's comments. Everybody, I'm completely committed to everyone on this board doing their sincere best for this. Go ahead.
Very quickly, I think the interesting thing to me is that while we all had different perspectives and different verbiage, we all consistently across the board independently came up with very similar issues with this, and you know, both strengths and flaws in it. And I thought that was telling and should be telling to everybody.
That's a good point, Mr. Brady. What the council should take away, I think, is it seems everybody on the board acknowledges the disruption in neighborhoods, acknowledges certain populations within the town, contribute to that. It's just a question of what's the best way to address that and what's fair and what's consistent with the comp plan. So that's why they get the big bucks. They got elected. So we'll pass this on to them. I think I asked Mr. Marcella, should we probably take 2 votes? One on the definition or no? I don't know. I'm
It's
kind of
one
assuming the
yeah.
definition isn't going to meet much opposition.
Yeah, I mean, it's one ordinance,
It's one ordinance, take 1 vote.
take one vote. I mean, you can certainly
We could
give your
comment.
comment, absolutely, but I would take one vote. I don't,
Yeah, I will make a comment on the definition. I'm glad we took out commuting, which was in, I think, the Providence definition, or it was in ours in 2020. I think we took it out. I think a point that people ought to, as they rush to say, well, the student ordinance is going to be so easy to enforce, more and more people, and I think we all know this as parents, more and more people, because of the absolutely absurd cost of college education, are getting their degrees online. And we'll probably have a growing number of people living in this town, renting in this town, that are enrolled at Phoenix University. And I don't know how you're going to be able to identify those kids. I understand the majority at URI. I understand that. But in 1972, I lived with 2 other guys at URI and 1 guy from PC. So there was 4 of us. And so it does happen quite a bit. And I think my only point is the online degrees are going to get more prevalent and tougher to enforce. So I just think the council needs to look at other ways to enforce. But anyhow, I need, yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask, Steve? Hello, are you a student or are you related? I mean, how, to me, it's like the person on the other side, they don't have to tell you that. I mean, what's the authority of the town to enforce? I mean, I know the intention, but what's the authority of the town to say only 3 students can be here, there's 6 cars out here? I want to see all the three of you, whatever. They say, go jump in the lake, close the door.
Okay, so obviously, we have the legal authority to draft and pass the ordinance.
Yeah.
That's the first part. The second part is you're talking about enforcement. The enforcement, a housing inspector has to follow the same constitutional rules as police officers. They have the right to go on the property. They don't have the right to enter without, obviously, a search
You don't have a
warrant or
warrant in hand, yeah.
I believe I said this last time, and I'll say it again. We pass ordinances, and the ordinances are assumed to be followed by law-abiding people. That's like saying, why pass gun ordinances when criminals are going to use guns? That doesn't alleviate the need or necessity to pass those ordinances. And there are, and I'll admit, enforceability can be difficult, but that should not be a reason to not pass the ordinance.
Right.
It's up to the enforcement agencies, whether it's the building official, whether it's the police, or whatever other mechanism. Nowadays, technology, there are computer software companies that can gain information from databases, et cetera, that can help in enforcement. So there's different type and evolving enforcement mechanisms, or proof mechanisms to do that. That's like, again, saying, well, why do we have, if someone does a two-family house in a single-family zone, how do we prove that if they're not going to let us in the house? Well, there's other ways to do that. And if they don't let us in the house, then, we would have to go to court and get a subpoena or a warrant to be let into the house. And there's municipal court. You certainly can go to municipal court.
Right.
You can get an order from the judge to allow entry of a building official to enforce that type of zoning enforcement. So the fact that, you're right, people have the constitutional right not to answer to the government, but that shouldn't, in my opinion, shouldn't be a reason to not pass a valid ordinance. It's up to the enforcement agency, whether it's the police, the building official, or other enforcement agencies, or the prosecutor. That's really the prosecutor's problem. That's not this board's problem or the town council's problem. Ultimately, the prosecutor in municipal court, superior court, has the burden at some point to prove to a judge that there are X amount of people living there, and that there is a violation of the ordinance, no different than when I go to municipal court and I have to prove X, Y, and Z. We do it by photographs, we do it by testimony, we do it by admission. So there's different ways to do it. But again, in my opinion, the fact that it's difficult shouldn't be a reason to not pass an ordinance.
Okay.
But as I said earlier, we talked about this in 2016. We're talking about the same thing right here. So if there's a way to do it, why aren't we doing it?
Well,
We would have to have this, you only have to walk the road once, the word gets out. This town's tough, so.
Correct. And again, that's not the purview of this board. It would be the purview of the building official, the council to fund certain
The
agencies.
planning board shouldn't talk about this? No?
Well, you can talk about it, but as far as what happens in enforcement later on, that would be entirely, again, Providence does it ironically, in Massachusetts. If you look at they have unrelated ordinances, all in college towns, Worcester, Amherst.
Yeah.
And it's consistent, and, whether, in my opinion, if there's an ordinance on the books and it says you can't build a house more than 35 feet, then most people, 99% of the people, will not build a house more than 35 feet. And that's why the ordinance is there. And for the 1% that doesn't follow the ordinance, it's up to the municipal government to prove that, and there's going to be people who either slip through the cracks or get away with it, but that shouldn't
But
be.
we have more than 1% here.
And Joe.
Ironically,
wait a minute, Mark.
maybe not. If you take
Right.
the entirety of the houses and you take truly the amount of people that are more than four, let's just say, who rent to more than four people, I don't have that figure, but I'm assuming it's not very high. An issue like this came before when we were at this legislature regarding housing authorities and how many people thought like housing authorities evict a lot of people because they always see housing authorities in court evicting people. And when you look at the figures, it turned out to be less than 1%, which is less than a landlord. But when they see a housing authority evicting someone, they think, oh, it's prevalent. So I don't know if anyone has those figures, but I can guarantee you the figures of the people that are above the current ordinance is compared to the housing stock.
And this comes back, this comes back to the point we talked about initially. Is in 216, we set the bar because when you set a number, people mostly comply. And we still believe that to be true. How many site reviews do we get through here on the third Tuesday of every month? 4 or 5? How many building permits are issued during that month? Lots. Which tells me the overwhelming majority of people are complying with the rules. And I think that's the case here. Mark?
Fully understand what council's saying, and we'll.
I want to move
we'll
to the
in
vote
that
too,
dir-
so
we'll vote
let's
in that
wrap it
direction.
up.
But I think that this whole conversation goes to the core of what my concerns with this thing is the fact that it is not a comprehensive approach. I mean, if there was some sort of registration program, or or even some sort of codification and performance status of penalties where landlords have to not only register themselves, but their tenants and contact information, license plates, registrations, et cetera, so forth. It makes the enforcement of this easier. It also means performance is going to be better. And that's what I see as a flaw in this. And so I just wanted to
I'll just
reemphasize my point.
continue to add, if the number were the same and the zones were the same, I'd probably have a different approach on this because I think both populations need to be addressed. But they're not. It's 3 and 4, and it's different zones, and I don't think it's fair. So we're going to move to a motion. Does someone want to make a motion to council to recommend up or down on the 3 student, the definition of student? Well, we're going to take them together.
Taking it together?
Yeah, Steve said we'll take one. Yeah, we'll take one. So if you can make a motion relative to the student definition and the 3 student in the R10, R10A, and R20 zone. Anybody?
Go ahead, read your rule. You have it, go ahead, do it.
So I motion that we approve the proposed ordinance change with Section 1 adding the definition of college student, and Section 2 adding Section 7.21, student-occupied dwellings located in R1, R10, R10A, and R20, limiting a dwelling unit not be occupied by more than 3 college students unless the building in which the dwelling is located is owner-occupied. And for the record, I'd like to incorporate the staff memo and the staff report on the comprehensive plan consistency. And I believe the staff memo addresses all of the criteria that are required for planning board review of a zoning amendment change, text change.
Mr. Friday, are you citing the elements in the comp plan as consistent that are cited by Mr. DeLuca in the memo?
Yes.
Okay.
The items in the,
Okay.
is consistent with the comp plan and consistent with the zoning.
And with the zoning, okay. Very good.
And in addressing the items that in 21.1, number 1 through 5, which are in Mr. DeLuca's memo.
Okay, thank you.
Seconded.
That's a motion for approval by Mr. Friday, seconded by Mr. Brady. I'm going to take a roll call vote because it's a roll call type motion. Mr. Friday,
Yes.
Mr. Brady,
Under protest, yes.
Dr. O'Neill?
No.
Mr. Fleming, I'm a no. So unfortunately, I always like to have 5 people here. It's unavoidable that we don't have 5. There's no way to have avoided this. So we have a motion that fails, 2-2. I see no reason to make a counter motion. I think the motion for approval failed, and that's what'll be sent to the council, correct? With no recommendation. And all the documentation here will be included in Mr. DeLuca's staff memo. Yeah, I'll take a look at it before it goes.
What I will do is transfer the information from the staff report that is identified as Addendum A and the staff memo as yours, as
Yep.
your commentary.
Correct.
But with the end of that memo, it'll be under your header instead of mine, Mr. Fleming.
Yep.
And at the end of that memo, it'll point out some of the discussion and the fact that the motion was made and was not approved,
Yep.
but was
2-2.
deadlocked.
And the commentary by the various members, at least summarize that.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think there was some key elements brought up by
Yeah,
this board.
we'll
that
try to
needs be
include them. We'll try to include them.
Thank you.
Yep, we'll do that. Okay, thank you. I'm going to take 5, I was going to clear the room, but there's really no need to clear the room, but I will take 5, and then we'll come back. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, so related to this motion and decision.
Yep.
Your comments, and I believe comments of many on the board, and the comments in the staff memo are that this isn't looking at it in a comprehensive manner, and I don't know if we can put a work group together to work on a provision to address it in a comprehensive manner.
I think that would have to come from the council.
Right.
I think they would, I mean, I guess we could take that initiative. I'm not sure the council would be receptive to that. I'd much rather have them
Okay.
send that back to us with that kind of, and I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Steve? Yeah,
You can't, it would be, I won't say a waste, but it may be not reasonable to initiate any action until after July 17th.
Yeah, so let's work through this.
yep. July 17th 's the council hearing. Where they could take that up, Rupert, they could take that up. Correct. Which will come back to us, Steve? Yeah, so that'll come back, and we'll do it in the context of whatever exists. Okay.
Not an omnibus bill as they would have in Congress, but we're working our way.
Right. Right.
It's incremental.
So you guys can't add one of your favorite projects to a bill that has nothing to do with it, right? Right, okay, thanks. We'll take 5. Thank you. thank you. I'd like to call the meeting back to order, get back to our regular agenda. Next is a pre-application review, a minor subdivision, Indian Rock Farm Road Parcel Plat Y-4, Lot 4, West Lakes LLC, Paul Carr, Mr. Garrahy.
Members of the Planning Board, John Garrahy on behalf of West Lakes and Paul Carr. So this is a pre-application, so I think very informal, get your sense, kind of discussion of where we are and where we're headed with this project, and to get some input from you on a pre-application. Mr. DeLuca, to his credit and to the board's credit, required that we get a letter from the owner of the private road, Indian Rock Farm Road, I think to get everybody focused on it, and we provided a copy of that to Mr. DeLuca, and he made a copy to the board this evening. So the owner provided an indication that if this is approved, he will provide access across Indian Farm Road in order to go in to where we want to go in, to the spot up on the left over there. And the two conditions would be that there would be only a single-family dwelling on that lot, and that there would be no further subdivision of the property, which both conditions are acceptable, and it's my understanding, is my client's understanding of the way this would be developed. So it would be one house at this part, no further subdivision of this lot. Couple of issues here, and I have, Mr. Pimentel has taken a look at this, and I have an email from him, and I want to go over those points because he kind of indicates he's not exactly sure how to handle this and what relief is required. So I wanted to talk about that. But essentially, as many of you know, this is a 22-acre parcel. West Lakes convenience store and gas station is located on Point Judith Road. This is the back parcel. Much of it is wetlands. Certainly, we're going to have those discussions going forward, but the delineation of the wetlands indicates that this single-family dwelling can be located in where it's shown on the plan over there, with the access through this private road. And that, I think, is really the issue. It's a minor two-lot subdivision. The commercial property down below is zoned commercial BB. The property up above is zoned R80, so permitted, and so that it would be divided, so that would be approximately, let me just get my notes here. Lot 1 would be 18 acres. Lot 2 would be 4.7 acres. Many of that 4.7 acres is undevelopable and is wetland, and as you can see where the house would be developed.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe has a question.
Yeah, what percentage? It's a big parcel, but what's the dry area?
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's obviously a big parcel, it's R80, but what's the potential for another dwelling there in terms of another site within this parcel?
I can have that if you want.
Please, go right ahead.
I've taken a look at the plan pretty
Yep.
closely. Lot 2, which is what you're looking at there on the screen, would be 4.7 acres, as Mr. Gary mentions. 2.16 acres would be buildable. That's the part on the left-hand side of the screen. The right-hand side of the screen is 2.55 acres of wetland. In an R80 zone, you need roughly 2 acres. So there's no potential for that lot to be subdivided to yet garner a second residential lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick point of order. The non-subdivision agreement between the property owner and the easement, will that be included as a deed restriction?
Yes.
For that going forward?
Yes.
Thank you.
Didn't we talk about this, Mr. Marcello, that you can't put that condition on someone?
No, well, you can, but there has to be reasons, but he's putting it in the deed. This is a voluntary restriction.
It's between the between the.
So the board couldn't impose that, or the zoning board couldn't impose that, but the owner could?
No, the board can impose a restriction.
Okay,
The board can impose a restriction of no further subdivision. They can do that. It's legally permitted,
All
but
right.
they would need specific reasons to do so. So that's, I don't want to get into those because that's really a subject.
No, I know,
of
so maybe the
DeSimone.
case we discussed, there weren't any
But-
specific
But in
reasons.
this case, it's not an issue because they are not only
Voluntarily.
deed restricting it, but we can make it a condition of
Okay.
approval, and the reason would be that they've agreed to it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Go ahead,
No
Mr.
question about that. There's going to be, I know I'm going to go to the zoning board in a couple of days on a similar situation, but no development of that second lot. This is the only lot that's going to be developed, and it's going to be a private agreement restriction between the parties and can be a condition of yours if you so desire.
So point me out again, the easement, where's it going? The road?
So it's just, it's off the screen right now, Indian Rock Farm Road. So it goes up there. The easement is across the road within, so there's a couple of issues here. Maybe it's easier if I read some of the questions, because it's a matter of frontage, how much frontage you need on a private road. So interestingly, I'd say your zoning ordinance doesn't have a frontage requirement, dimensional requirement. It says, the zoning ordinance says that it has to have frontage on a town-approved road. It doesn't say how much. And it doesn't have in your table 10.6, and the building official points this out, table 6.4 dimensional regulations. There is a minimum for lot width, but not for lot frontage. This alone causes some issues and should be corrected.
So in the R20, R40, there's a lot width, but not a lot frontage.
I don't know if there's lot frontage in any of the zones. I know,
Frontage is interesting. We
Wow.
know what frontage means, direct contact with a
Right.
roadway. It's defined in the zoning ordinance, but the regulated element under section 6.4 is lot width. So Mr. Gary is correct.
Interesting.
But, yeah, but one of the other things that he hasn't mentioned, and maybe he's going to, is that access to a private road, well, development of private roads and subdivisions is the purview of the planning board. In other words, if someone came to you with a subdivision and they wanted private roads, and you didn't want that to happen, you would not have to approve that. Private roads are only allowed in, I believe, minor subdivisions. I'd have to look that up.
Okay.
so if I may,
Yes, in minor subdivisions.
go ahead, Mike, I'm sorry.
Point being, this Indian Rock Farm Road is a private road. It's a road that is acknowledged by the town as a road because it shows up on our maps, on our tax assessor's maps as a road, not as an easement through someone else's property. So in my mind, that's enough to acknowledge that it's acceptable. And when you look at the graphic here, you see that just above this, it's actually looking west, but just above this is a line that crosses Indian Rock Farm Road. From that point further, it's a driveway. It is not a road any further.
What's
So-
the distinction you're making? I'm going to make sure I understand the difference. Because I know it runs, I do have some the plat maps that are indicating that it goes well down into the other properties, and other properties are
Right.
down below.
Right.
Not
But you
shown
see
up,
this, this is Indian Rock Farm Road between this property and that property.
Yeah.
Then it cuts through here, this guy owns this lot too. When it gets to this point, there's a line across it. From here further west, it's not a road any longer.
From the town's point of view.
Right. It's a driveway. So he has frontage, this land here, this trapezoidal lot and this triangular lot, both have frontage on Indian Rock Farm Road. Obviously, what Mr. Carr is asking for is to be able to utilize whatever it is, I can't remember the width of
50
it.
feet. So
50 feet of that
So
frontage.
he's only got a point on that road, and it's not 50 feet where it touches the road. But what's suggesting is that there be an easement within the triangle, which would provide him the 50-foot frontage.
Right.
He has 200 foot of width, if, and the building official pointed that out, but it just touches the road. But the suggestion is that they would provide an easement which would provide 50 feet on the road.
Are you saying, John, are you saying that he doesn't need a frontage variance?
Well, he needs a-
With
he
the
does-
easement?
Well, I wasn't sure of the status of the private road as town accepted. So you're saying, it doesn't need there's no number required. But this says lot frontage on a town accepted approved street cannot be, you must have it on a town accepted road unless, without approval of the planning board, unless the planning board approves that.
Right.
And I didn't know whether that approval had to be done as part of this process.
It may be a belt and suspenders thing to do, or you could maybe work
Right.
through that discussion with Mr. Marcello at some point as this development progresses through the
Right.
approval process.
And then 25.1 of the zoning ordinance requires frontage on a town accepted road.
Right. Right.
So that was the
But
kind
town
of,
accepted doesn't necessarily mean town owned.
no, and I think I used the wrong terminology, town accepted road, but yes.
So this is a town recognized road, but not necessarily an accepted road.
That's,
did you do a title search on the road?
No.
that may, yeah, that may be needed.
Joe, did you have a question for Mr.
Yeah, I
Gary?
was going to ask to define this particular road, whether it's town accepted or it's not, because we, right? How could we agree if this was not a town accepted roadway, so, anyway, you're already, you're looking into that.
Well, I guess we all know that's an issue that needs to get addressed and resolved. And I think there's going to be a little more digging that needs to be done.
Is that term interchangeable with owned, accepted, or is that
I
a
don't
different?
believe so.
It's a different term?
I'm not sure how different the laws are in Massachusetts, but in the town that it came from, which I was on the planning board and the town council, and finding 86% of the roads in the town were not accepted.
Yeah.
They were private roads.
Right.
The town thought they could get away with different things, and then ended up having to plow them and do all of that because of liability, but they don't own any of the roads. So then there's a huge discussion of accepting the roads, and then the financial, so it's gone back, but 86% of the roads were recognized,
Right.
met all the standards, were never accepted.
So what,
We
So
have,
they're
we have
private-
similar problem
So
here.
they're private roads.
but what's the relevant point here? The relevant point is frontage on a,
Front on a street which has been improved to town road standards for which, yes, has been improved. That's 21.1 of the zone, 25.1 of the zoning ordinance. Front on a street which has been improved to town road standards. Doesn't have to be accepted by the town.
Right.
And that would be determined by a title search as to whether or not it's still owned in fee by a private owner, or did it
Yeah,
transfer
the
somewhere?
accepted part would be by, because you
Yeah.
can accept it by town council.
Right.
You'd have to look
Yeah.
for town-
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Town standards would be a letter from DPW.
right, width and
With and
composition, right?
that kind of stuff.
That kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
That stretch of Indian Rock Farm Road might comply. I know once you get into further down, it gets narrower and it turns to gravel.
And we're not, guys, we're not taking any vote here. This is just, we're just reacting, but obviously there's a lot of work to do. Any other
Right.
points that you want to make relative to this?
No, I think that's, I think the point's made. I think the question is, so the access point is 50 feet, and whether or not that's frontage. If it is a town improved, or whatever the language is, which has been approved to town standards, we're using an easement to do that, and it doesn't front on it directly. So I guess that would be a question for us, if that's.
But guys, excuse me, before the applicant proceeds, aren't there certain things that we need to say whether the town would be comfortable with in terms of that?
I mean, where is the, I mean, legally, I think we're on the same page, I believe, in other words, as far as being able to do a title search, so John, both of us can take a look at it to see where it is, and then getting something from DPW or whatever town entity determines if the road's up to standards, and then we can make a decision
From there.
whether you need certain relief or you don't need certain relief.
And the concern, at least from my perspective on the board, is that we're not opening the floodgates to develop all of that. So, and that's been taken care of with the fact that you've already stated it's going to be deed restricted, and we can make conditions on top of that, so.
Right.
Like I said, belt and suspenders.
But my concern too is that the applicant doesn't go and do all this work with all this, spend all these resources if there's a legal point with the road that's just a no-brainer. Like it's dead in the water. So you got to work that out with Steve, that there's a reasonable chance,
I
right?
think they still, in order for the owner to have a reasonable chance of, viable approval here, they're going to have to expend a little bit more effort and a little more time with Mr. Garrity and working with Mr. Marcella to get through this,
Yeah.
this roadway thing to a point of some level of confidence. So I guess the question mark here is, should that all be resolved? Where do we stand on this potential lot? What does the planning board feel about this lot? I've written you a brief fact sheet. As you know, for pre-apps, I don't do a full report. I just do a brief fact sheet. The soil qualities in this area are rainbow silt loam. We've seen a lot of development in rainbow silt loam. There is no water or sewer accessible to this site, so the issue of providing a well and on-site septic system, on-site wastewater treatment system is something that they have to, hurdles they will have to get over. And you may want to know that they can do all of that before you issue any preliminary approvals or master plan approval on this.
And preliminarily, again, premature, but based on everything we see, the amount of acreage here, the location of an on-site with the wetlands is feasible.
Well, there's enough land area there to fit a septic system by, certainly. In fact, this is showing a proposed OWTS right here. But you also need, in the state of Rhode Island, you need a certain amount of horizontal distance between a well and a septic system. Right. So.
But all that's for the applicant to
and
try to
you've got
work
the
out,
radius
right?
of the well site.
Yeah, again, I mean, there's no approval here. This is,
Yeah.
I don't see, there's enough upland. And all the issues are laid out relative to septic, the road, water, and obviously the zoning relief that would probably be required. So, I mean, you guys can establish that. So, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say don't take another step, but you do it with caution, right?
Of course, no guarantees.
Right, no guarantee.
I think, let me just say this, I think we're pretty well satisfied, we'll get a title report that road is owned and operated by the Kenyon family, the LLC that owns that property as a private road. It's not a public road, so I guess the question is it to town road standards to meet this requirement so that it meets the frontage requirement? And I would guess then if it does, it's a subdivision, if it meets the requirement, the frontage, I'm not thinking of any variance that you need from the zoning board.
You cited some potential ones in your bullet points, Mike.
I believe you need relief, even with that distinction between frontage and lot width.
Okay. Okay, so you think we
Because-
need that, we need the width, okay, the frontage has to meet the lot width requirement, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. You can argue against that, and there is some very oblique language in the subdivision regulations about flag lots and when they may be allowable. We haven't approved any flag lots in town in a long time, at least not in my tenure.
Mike,
Not to say I'm not open to that.
Mike, what's 3 subsection C of the subdivision regs? You say there might need relief from that. What would that be?
That is the land unsuitable. At the time I wrote that, I wasn't sure of the acreage of the dry area.
Okay.
I thought there was less than 2 acres of dry upland area. Section 3C is when we subtract out the land unsuitable and we have to see if the lot still nets out sufficient upland area to meet the zoning minimum. We do know now that that's
That
possible.
meets it.
So I could have taken that part of that.
So
bullet
could
out.
this morph after Mr. Garahy does his work into a minor subdivision?
Potentially.
It might not need the level of relief.
Right. That would be nice.
I don't know. Okay.
Thank,
Good enough?
good enough. Mr. Khan, do you have any questions or any concerns you want to address? Does anybody have any questions for me?
No, I think we've, you know the issues.
Okay, and we're glad we presented it. I mean, it would be unfortunate to present this for the first time in an application, and I think this is healthy for,
That's what the pre-app's for.
exactly.
Yes, sir.
So when I did meet with Mr. Kenyon, prior to all this was going on, we're very close, I've been there for 24 years. He specifically said to me, one lot, which we've all talked about, he says, I don't want, this is for your family, boom, 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 and, that's, in other words, if everything goes through, it'll be drawn out on the easement, what is required, that it will only be one dwelling, never a second dwelling ever, which, as you were stating, it is 2.2 acres, but that's the agreement I have with the land, or the road owner, Mr. Kenyon. that-
And it sounds like we would want that as a condition,
Correct.
and you do too, so that's fine.
That's why we only did a simple thing. Yes, he's an approval for it, but naturally, we got a lot of
Okay.
hurdles to clear before we get to that point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
All
time.
right, good luck. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Okay. We know Farrelly's been continued, so now we're moving to Point, Plat O, Lot 117, 26 Jean Street. Mr. Point's back. So I guess I have a simple question. Did you take up any of the suggestions for alternatives, or are you going forward with your original proposal?
We're going with our original plan,
Okay.
actually.
All right. So I think we discussed this. Do you guys recall all of this?
I think we need to summarize it again.
You want, Jill, can you give us the overview of this again to bring the board back up? Yep. Right. And this was done prior to Mr. Point owning this property. It was two units were created,
I would let Mr. Point answer that. I wouldn't-
Yes, it was.
Was.
It was
and it was done illegally to everyone's knowledge, right? The two-
illegally or legally?
Illegally, the 2 units. It was never approved. That's why you're here, to approve it, right? It was created,
Yes,
the 2
I-
units were created.
So what I would say is that we don't have a record of it
Okay.
in the history file that we've been able to locate.
So we don't have a record that it was approved as a 2-unit.
Correct. Yes, that's the wrong terminology.
What I just said is correct.
Undocumented.
It is undocumented, okay. But the applicant is here to get approval, to get a blessing codification of a 2-unit
Correct.
in a zone that doesn't have sufficient frontage or area, in a lot that doesn't have sufficient frontage or area.
Correct. The 2 families allowed in an R10.
Correct.
20,000 square feet, 200 feet of
And,
frontage.
and if you all recall, Mr. Point confirmed, correct me if I'm wrong, that they have historically rented this under a
Section
Section
8
8
housing
provision.
with the town.
And they would probably prefer to do that going forward. And I think myself and others suggested that therefore they might want to come in under a comprehensive permit or some other means to get an affordable unit documented, deed restricted, and it might be easier for the board to approve the 2 units. And I guess, Mr. Point, you talked to people about
Yes,
that,
Yes, we've talked to multiple people about it, and they don't recommend it.
but you don't want to do that. And my concern was, notwithstanding what Mr. Point and his family want to do with this, or plan to do with this, as you know, it can change hands, and somebody could have 2 market rate units in an area that, if it had come to us whenever, and we had been asked to approve it, we probably would have never approved it. So I'm not in favor of codifying that or accepting that. But I guess Mr. Point doesn't want to change his approval, and even if we deny, wants to go to zoning,
We're going to
correct?
continue, yes, we're going to continue with the application.
Okay, so that's kind of where we are. Rupert?
So, Chairman, and council, could we consider this an existing non-conforming use?
The building official doesn't have any records that would allow it, that we don't have any records that would allow it to be a pre-existing non-conforming use, even without permits. So that's the reason why. Not only is there not records of the construction, but there aren't any records that go back pre-existing to zoning where it would be a pre-existing.
Joe?
Yeah, Steve, the zoning board then has the authority to agree with this proposal.
Yeah, correct. They would allow the 2 variances, the frontage and the lot area, and that would, because the 2-family is allowed. It's really it's simply a dimensional variance request.
Yeah, yeah.
So if they accepted the variances, then it would be 2 market rate units or whatever they wanted to do with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a concern, and I think we talked about that. It's as the Lord gives and the Lord taketh away. So the future, having been here a long time, the new owner, I know you're never going to sell, but the new owner is not going to have.
But I'm the owner, so
Yeah.
you're dealing with me. That's
No,
all.
we have to look to the future.
We know that.
Well,
but,
I know
but
that.
it's,
So I
it-
understand your point,
Right.
but we
Time-
can't leave it.
time-
But you're speculating as well.
We're planning.
No,
Yeah,
That's our board.
no, we're talking
No,
reality.
he's speculating.
No, we're talking reality. Time, things change, and I know what you're asking, and you're wonderful people, and you're doing the right thing. But the question of the property in the future, how it would be managed by a potential future owner.
We've seen a lot of people stand right there and say this is their dream house, they're living forever, and a month later it's on the.
Have you been down my street?
It's on the, yeah, it's a nice place. Yeah. So,
Glad that you did some homework on that, thank you.
we walked down, we went down. Yeah, we all drove down, looked at
Okay.
it. So, what's your pleasure? He didn't want to, he doesn't want to change the proposal, so now we,
So we move the application as complete, we want to go on there, anybody else to speak?
anyone in the public wish to speak on this one? No?
So we need that motion, right?
Yep.
Move the application is complete. Before us, Point Tax Assessor Plat O Lot 117 is complete and in conformance to the Town Comprehensive Plan.
So motion for completeness by Dr. O'Neill, seconded by Mr. Brady. All those in favor? Aye. Rupert? Yeah, 4-0. And then the motion itself, if you're going to move to deny, you got to cite certain aspects. If you're going to move to approve, you need to look at the conditions that staff has put in. So I need a motion from someone up or down on this.
This is a tough one, but that's why we get paid the big bucks, right? So, you know you'll get this from zoning, right?
I'm not going to speculate.
Yeah,
No,
that's a wise move.
I'm
I
not a
don't know
betting,
that, I don't know that he's going to get it from
I'm
zoning.
not a betting person, but in any case.
You're going to make the motion, Doc?
No, you were.
Oh, I am, thank you. All right. I would move denial of the applicant for tax assessor's plot 0, lot 117, seeking relief for square footage and lot width. The owner has not shown hardship in that these are pre-existing, that the owner purchased the property knowing or should have known the deficiencies in this.
Also include planning board review. It's not in compliance with applicable development performance standards. Where, I had these before. Sorry. I left my notes at home.
Availability of alternatives?
Yeah, availability of alternatives, opposed to, adverse impacts, mitigation 15, and I think that's it.
Did you get that, Mike, Joe?
Oh, suitability of the site for proposed use, number 3, that was the key one to me. Okay?
Second.
The motion by Mr. Brady, second by Dr. Neal. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All set. Good luck with zoning.
Thank you.
Okay, last item on the agenda is a bond reduction of Brookside Estates. Mike, do you want to give us this? And who, does the council have to approve this? Or do we approve it? Just us?
So, Brookside Estates, as you recall, is the 5-lot subdivision up on South Pier Road. I can't find my notes.
Mike, you want to use this?
I just put them down on the floor. It is, it was, when it was originally brought through for preliminary approval, we received a bond amount, a bond estimate of $755,549. That was from the applicant's engineer, Principi Engineering. Then it went through process, it went through approval. As you know, the bond, in order to record, we have to receive the bond, and that hasn't happened yet. So he went out and he got construction quotes from 3 different contracting firms. And as you can see in the middle of the sheet that I gave to you and up on the wall, the estimates were all pretty close, you know. I mean, for a project of that size to be within $10,000 or $15,000 of cost estimate usually gives a good indication of what it's really going to cost to build. So the applicant asked me if he could have his bond amount reduced so that he wouldn't have to pay, you know, he's got to pay for this bond. So the lesser the bond, the less expensive the bond cost is. So I told him that I wanted, I ran that idea by the town engineer. The town engineer said, have his engineer recalculate the bond amount. And he did. And again, it was Principi Engineering, and he recalculated it at $505,000 and submitted that documentation to me. I got very detailed documentation. Forwarded that to the town engineer. He looked at it. He looked at the scope of work in the bond. He looked at the scopes of work in each of the construction quotes, found that they were essentially the same, and so that these numbers do coincide with a certain amount of confidence. And so his recommendation to me, John Gerhardt's recommendation to me, was that it would make sense to reset the bond amount at the highest of the 3 quotes. So my recommendation to you is to round the highest one up, which is number 2, to $555,000 and reset the bond amount at that amount.
Do you have any idea why Principi came back so much lower than the other 3 construction quotes?
The only thing I know that managed to get the number down was he did take out a contingency component. And I guess the reason he took out the contingency component was because he already they had these 3 construction quotes in hand. So there was a level of confidence that the contingency was not needed. Plus, recall that the bond amount, original bond amount, was drafted during calendar year 2021 in the height of the COVID lockdown. And as we all know, anybody who's been to Home Depot in the last 3 years knows all construction materials were very high high cost.
So that's my question. It's way out of my league, but why are we just going over that 554 when aren't costs still rising
No,
quickly? No?
No.
They've leveled off?
they've gone down
They've gone down. Okay.
significantly.
Except plywood.
And normally, Mike, when we set a bond, correct me if I'm wrong, this is amount of money that we can grab if the applicant defaults on what they're supposed to do, and we can complete the job.
Yeah, his job, his job is to post the bond with the town, we hold the money. He then has to come up with that much money and pay his contractor to do the job. Then he provides us with a status report at some point,
Right.
months later, that says, I'm 27% complete, I'd like a reduction of
But
$80,000.
But Gerhardt's comfortable that the 555, if that were to happen, if they would default, that
Yeah.
that
We
would
had-
be
we had-
sufficient for us to complete the job.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's exactly what he said to me.
The job is the roadway.
Right.
It's essentially the roadway. Remember that this development has some pretty significant drainage
Yeah.
Yeah.
components to it. This row over here is a big detention facility. In the roadway itself, there are some detention components along the sides within the road right-of-way. So it's pretty expensive. For a small subdivision, it's pretty expensive infrastructure-wise.
I mean, I'm going to go with staff on this. I don't
We have a level of confidence. The town engineer felt pretty comfortable.
Well, if we went with 600,000, it still reduces him by $155,000 and gives us a little bit of a contingency.
You can do that, too.
Yep.
I'm going to go with the 555, but.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the 555. I was just putting that out there if people are uncomfortable, but.
If you want to make that motion, we can see where it goes, but that's up to you, Mark.
No, I'm comfortable.
Anyone in the public have a comment?
How long does that number hold? Obviously, we're changing numbers here. Obviously, they haven't even started.
Right.
So how long is, when these quotes come in or we make a decision, does that hold for 12 months, 24 months?
Once you set the bond amount, it holds forever. That's it. If the applicant had filed his bond when originally filed the $755,000 bond, then he would have been able to go forward, do the construction. He would have provided us with information on how much completion he had gotten through and suggested a significant bond reduction down to whatever was left. And at that point, we would be having the same sort of a conversation about how there was significant inflation in the original bond. His contractors assured him that he's 50% done and he only needs $250,000 worth of work yet to do, that kind of thing.
But to Mr. Brady's point, this isn't done at all, right?
Nothing's done.
He hasn't done anything.
No. They could do that also. As you know, developers can build all the infrastructure without posting a bond. The caveat there is they can't record the plat until all the infrastructure is done.
Yeah, you're right. Most of the time, we get a bond reduction, the work's 50, 75, 95% done, and they just want some of the money back. I'm starting to come around with a little cushion.
Well, what they're trying to do is not even so much the money back because it's a bond. They're trying to reduce their service on that bond. That's significant because they're playing, even if they're good credit, they're prime plus.
I might
3.
support a higher number than the 555.
It's significant.
I might. So, somebody want to make a motion?
What are you guys comfortable with? You comfortable with the 550?
555.
555, excuse me,
Well,
and 99 cents.
be bold, Mr. Brady, throw out a number, see where it goes.
This has nothing to do with obstetrics and gynecology, so I would accept the numbers that are presented.
Oh, my God.
Doc, so many things just came through my brain and just fortunately stopped at my mouth.
All right, let's have a motion, please.
All right, I would move a reduction of the bond from the present 755 to the 555 as proposed.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Brady, seconded by Dr. Neal. All's in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And then the last item,
Successful birth on that one.
under administrative matters, is the 28th agenda. Is there a necessity for that meeting? No. We have nothing.
Jill,
The
do
two
we-
subdivisions have
do we have
fallen off.
nothing?
Are the site reviews off, or
Yet.
do you want to continue to hold the 28th to clear up some backlog, or do we just go to the July meeting? Okay, and we know we're going to have the two subdivisions for July.
No, the other subdivision that came off tonight was, it's not anywhere near ready.
No, I mean the two that were planned for the 28th.
That's what I meant, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Not this one. This one, you're going to get back on when we can get it back on. But you had two that were tabbed for the 28th
The one that is capped for 28th is Clark Road, that is going to be on for the 8th.
in July.
Yes.
But there was a second one.
That one was, Peter Murray, and that is nowhere near the.
Okay. All right. So Jill, we'll still have time for site reviews with Clark Road on July 18th.
I think the important thing is we're asking you guys, are you comfortable with giving up the next, that meeting, or would you prefer that we meet and you get some work?
You get no vote. You get no vote.
No, that's fine. The meeting doesn't go away. I just want to be clear.
Right.
The meeting will still be noticed and then it will be canceled because this has already been advertised in the paper.
The 28th.
Park Road went into the paper, didn't it
Right.
already? Yes.
So the question is, do you still want to hold the 28th? Would you guys, as a staff, want?
No, we do not need to.
Okay.
We do not need to.
So who shows up
I'll show up.
We show up for 15 minutes.
and tell people it's,
That's like we, you know.
So we don't have to show up.
We can post a postponement thing on the doors of the building, and, you know,
and does everybody think that's here going to be here on July 18th? Because we still have a fourth, fifth member who's, may not be here.
Yes. You guys
Yep.
plan to be here?
Mark? Yeah, all right. Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded, non-debatable.
Motion by Dr. Neal, second by
Got
Mr.
it.
Brady.
Love
All
Robert's
those in
rules.
favor?
Aye.
Thank you.